Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jonathan Tungu. I'm the head of strategic sourcing at Tecom Group. Basically, I'm here to present our response to the COVID-19 situation, how our procurement department has been able to handle the situation using a strategic supplier relationship approach to make sure that there is business continuity and all the requirements are met. But basically, in terms of this presentation, I will take you through our company, which is Tecom Group, what it does, and then our procurement function. And then thereafter, I will continue to take you through how we actually manage the whole situation around COVID as it evolved from the beginning of the year until now, and how we've seen some positive effects in terms of our response to the situation. So I'll move to the next slide. Yeah, so basically, Tecom Group is an entity which is part of Dubai Holding in Dubai. We are a very important organization in terms of ensuring the growth of Dubai, creating sustainable communities across Dubai. So for those who are familiar with Dubai, you might have heard of Dubai Internet City, Dubai Media City, Dubai Design District, International Academic Cities. So basically, these are communities that are all over Dubai that helps to sustain the economic growth and development of the country. We are partly owned by the government, and we've invested in multiple sectors. So we invest in education, we invest in real estate development, we invest in warehouses, we have laboratories. For example, Dubai Science Park is one of the recognized areas and communities in Dubai that provides companies that provide medical services in Dubai. We have Dubai Academic City, where most universities, international universities, are located in Dubai Academic City. So we have a procurement function, which is a shared service community that provides procurement services for all the 11 business communities that we have across Dubai. So we provide procurement service for Dubai Internet City, for Dubai Media City, Academic City. We provide the same services for Dubai Science Park, Dubai Knowledge Village, Dubai Industrial City. We also provide procurement services for some government subsidiaries. For example, Dubai Development Authority, which was previously known as Dubai DCCA, Dubai Community Creative Authority. So we are a shared service. We have SLAs with these communities to make sure that their requirements are provided when they need them and at the optimum price. So we manage a huge spend, a significant spend for all the entities. Most of indirect procurement is managed by us, except construction services, which is not managed by our procurement function. So I'll now take you through how we responded to the COVID-19 situation. You all remember when the COVID-19 situation came, nobody was really prepared. I would be lying if I say we had a business continuity management program that had envisaged such a situation coming. So we were not really prepared, and the situation was evolving. It was changing all the time, minute by minute. At the beginning, I think the instructions were like masks are not required, and then it came a point where we all needed to have masks and PPEs. At the beginning, nobody really knew how much it's going to penetrate the UAE. Yeah, it was mostly in China and mostly in other areas, spreading in Spain and Italy, but it hadn't really hit us hard. Yeah, there wasn't any lockdown, so we were operating from the offices. Most of our suppliers were coming on site. Yeah, so nobody really knew what was happening at the beginning. So our most important reaction towards that situation was basically to come to an understanding of what is really happening and how that might affect our supply chains. So our approach was mainly into two fronts. The first one was to understand. So gather as much information as possible so that we understand what is happening really globally and how that might affect us in the UAE, and eventually how it might affect our procurement function. Then the second approach was around risk analysis and understanding which key risks really affect the kind of goods or services that we procure as a procurement function. And then we also decided to how do we react once we have identified the risk? How do we react to it? How do we identify alternative supplier markets, especially for areas of supplies that are critical and maybe we do not have the suppliers for them? So how do we get alternative supplier markets? And then at the end of my presentation, I will talk about some of the insights that we were able to get, some of the information that we managed to gather around that help us as a business and as a procurement function. So the first part is market analysis. Yeah, we are lucky in terms of our organization. We have invested a lot in digitization. So we have procurement systems that are integrated together. We use Oracle as a procurement system. We also use Zycas for sourcing all goods and services. All our tenders are run through a Zycas procurement system. So we have also a tool that helps us to do spend analysis. So all this data that comes together is integrated in one tool that gathers information for us to understand our spend patterns and then develops specific strategic sourcing initiatives. So this tool really became handy when it came to the COVID situation, because we were able to map according to our suppliers where they are coming from. Yeah, so each supplier in every category, where is it coming from? Our most important categories is facility management, because as I said in the beginning, we manage different communities. We have different sites and different locations. So we wanted to understand in terms of the facility management, providing fit-out works, maintaining all these facilities is most of the services that we tend to procure. So we wanted to understand what's happening around facility management. And then another category is information systems, IT and information systems. Wanted to also understand in IT. We also procure a lot of marketing services and other elements of operational needs like pantry items, this lower value expenditure, which is also important. So at the beginning of the crisis, we wanted to understand globally, how does this situation really impact us? So we use the tool which used to provide us with live information. So our tool was also integrated with media channels that provides live information in terms of the number of infections in every country. So you can probably see in my presentation, you see Azerbaijan, how many people are affected or infected by that day that we pull the data. Guinea, in other countries in Europe as well, we're able to see live information in terms of what is happening and the evolution of the situation. So this information gave us some sort of comfort that at least we know what is happening. We know how many of our suppliers are affected, how many suppliers are based locally, and how many suppliers are coming from international, located in outside the country and might be affected by the crisis or impacted by the crisis. To some extent, we are also able to understand from our main contractors whether they have outsourced the items and whether they might be indirectly affected or not. So that was in our initial focus, to understand what is really happening globally and how it affects us locally. Then the second part was to map which risks are affecting us. So with our sourcing categories, we're able to map which specific risks. So one of the risks was travel restrictions. So you remember at the beginning of the crisis, there was a lot of travel advisory. Like you cannot travel from, for example, from Spain to the UAE because Spain is a high-risk area, or China. Flights to China were minimized. So you cannot travel from any other city in China. Probably, I think by March, you could only travel from Beijing to the UAE. So yeah, so we wanted to understand which suppliers have been affected by travel restrictions and which supply chains have also been impacted by travel restrictions. And then we also wanted to understand which categories of our requirements are affected by excess demand. Yeah, so for example, there was a rush to get medical equipment, protective equipment. There was a rush for in the market for procurement managers and individuals to source specific items. So we wanted to know which of our supply chains might be affected by excess demand. Then we also looked at the areas which might be affected by production risk. Yeah, so you remember when the situation started, some countries were actually, some cities had a complete shutdown. So some of these factories could not produce anymore. Maybe the laborers are affected or the workers are affected and they cannot commute within the cities. So such areas were affected by production risk. So we were able to map within our categories which supplies are affected by production risk. Then the other area of risk, which was important in our focus, was supply chain delay. Yeah, so one of the things that we tend to source in large quantities is hardware, a computer hardware. We have a lot of laptops and hardware that we provide for some of our entities or our communities. So that's an area which we saw there was a supply chain risk because most of the parts and assembles come from China. And at the beginning, China was greatly impacted. So we needed to really map that risk and find out what categories are affected and then develop mitigation plans. So that was the second part of our approach towards managing the situation. Then the third part was now, after we have understood which areas are affected by what level of risk, we also wanted to understand what are the alternative supply markets. This was part of the mitigation plan. So for example, you realize or you use a lot of Lenovo laptop and Lenovo is affected because of its supply chain. Actually, there was a communication from the CEO of Lenovo to say the chip manufacturer in China cannot supply the chips because, which was Intel. It cannot supply Intel chips because of the supply chain disruption. So we needed to work around and find, is there an alternative that we can get so that we can continue to source our hardware requirements for the business. So that was very, very important, identifying alternative suppliers. And with the help of our tool, it was very easy for us to map and say, okay, you have this supplier who is affected. He's in the same category as supplier X. Well, what is the alternative? So we were able to obtain or to get data regarding to the alternative supplier or supplies of the same commodity. Luckily, what we found out is that 95% of our supply chain is based locally. So we were dealing with only 5% of the supply chain, which is coming from outside the country. Yeah, what we realized also, we were able to work with our suppliers very closely to get alternative supplier markets. So working with our most important suppliers, especially the local suppliers, help us to develop other strategies around obtaining alternative supplier markets. So we work very collaboratively with our suppliers and with other stakeholders as well to come up with alternative areas to mitigate our risks. We also work with government agencies, which like Dubai Municipality, which would provide information in terms of the level of health advisory that was very, very important. For some of our sites like labor camps, we were getting daily guidelines in terms of what kind of policies, regulations we need to put in place to manage these kind of communities like labor. We also have labor accommodation in Dubai Industrial City. So that was very, very important. So we worked closely with all stakeholders, both internal and external, to come up with clear strategies on how to manage the situation. Then the other part of my presentation is what kind of information did we get that was really helpful in us managing the situation to be successful, to be where we are now. So we were able to obtain a lot of information to understand our spend patterns. As a result of the COVID-19 situation, it helped us to map our spend, and it also helped us to come up with business continuity strategies that were important. And also we believe that will be important for us moving into the future in terms of managing our spend and managing our risks much more in a much more better way. Okay, we also realized that PPEs was difficult to source, but we were able to work collaboratively with some of the most important suppliers, the strategic suppliers, to come up with alternative sources of PPEs. We were able to come up with alternative sources for IT items, and that was really helpful. And what we have now, we have information that has already mapped our risks. So for every supplier that we have a clear risk register, which should help us in the future. So that was what the tool, the spend analysis tool, and the approach that we took was very helpful to put this data together. On top of the spend analysis tool, we also went to our suppliers to ask them about information and how they feel the COVID-19 situation is affecting them. So we did a supplier survey to ask suppliers what are the potential risks they see among themselves. Especially this was done to the strategic suppliers. So what are the key risks that they see among themselves, and how will they mitigate the risks? So you can see here from this screen some abstracts of the responses that we were receiving from suppliers. For example, some of them were saying there is limited stock available. So for that kind of a supplier, we would say, okay, how do we work together to get additional stock? Other suppliers, for example, are telling us there is delay due to factory closure, or shipping facilities have been affected. So for that supplier, we would work together and understand what is it that we can do, or do we need to get an alternative suppliers. So some suppliers were greatly affected, and some suppliers were not really affected. So every supplier who had a risk or who identified a potential risk, we asked them, or we worked together to come up with a mitigation plan. So the next slide shows the mitigation plans that the supplier was saying they were putting in place. Yeah, so for example, some of them was mainly research work that wasn't affected, but some suppliers told us they have made arrangements to work from home, or they've made some arrangements to protect their workers and their people. So at least every supplier was able to provide for us what mitigation plan they have put in place. And that was very, very reassuring for us to know that we are managing the situation and to continue as the situation continues to evolve. So that was very, very important, the feedback from suppliers. So what were the key achievements? Yeah, so we are proud that within the last 9 months, or since when the situation really escalated from March until now, we've been stable. Most of our KPIs have not really been affected in a negative way. Some areas we've achieved some savings. Yeah, so towards the last 3 months, for example, we reviewed some of the contracts. Some of the contracts had to be renegotiated because of the changes in supply chain. So we were able to actually obtain some savings from contracts. It also allowed us to look at our supplier base and see, do we need to rationalize or do we need to maintain some of these suppliers? And we were happy that we were able to register and rationalize 300 suppliers. On-time delivery has not been affected. Yeah, so we've met our one of the KPIs, which was on-time delivery at 99%. Customer service is fine. It's well over 90%, which is above our usual targets. And fortunately, also, we have very few HSE incidents. And some of these incidents, one of the metrics in terms of the HSE incident requires, is about the COVID cases. So very limited instances of positive cases have been reported across our communities. And that is also accredited to some of the effective due diligence and the preparations we've put in place as a procurement function to make sure that services are delivered in a healthy and in a safe environment. Yeah, so those are some of the benefits that we've been able to achieve from managing the situation well, and we feel we're in a stronger place. We have very strong relationship with our suppliers right now because of the bond that was created between the time when the situation really escalated and until where we are at the moment. So that's my presentation, and I will create time for any questions. In case there is any questions from the audience, I'll be happy to look at those questions and respond to them. Thank you very much. Thank you. Are there any questions, Kiran? Yeah, let me see. You can see here. Yeah, I think there's a question. How do you manage various entities? Are all of them are in the same procurement platform, ERP platform? Yeah, so there's a question there. The audience is asking, how do you manage various entities? Are all of them in the same ERP? So we have one ERP platform, and the additional procurement system has been integrated into the one ERP. So we are all integrated, all requisitions are made through one platform, and everything is also happening in one platform. So it's integrated and it reads together. And the spend analysis tool also is integrated to the main ERP and the main sourcing tool. So we are all integrated and we use one ERP system. I think that answers the question. Yeah, is there any other question? Yeah, I can see another question there. The audience is asking if manpower was one of the challenges. Yes, manpower was one of the areas that we identified. Yeah, the local vendors are asking for immediate payment or advance payment. How did you manage that? Yeah, so manpower was one of the areas where we had challenges. And so many vendors were probably asking for advance payment. But in fact, it's one of the areas we had to review and see whether we actually needed that manpower. Remember, in March, there was a lockdown, and most of these functions, most of these resources were actually not required. But as part of the corporate social responsibility reaction from Tecom Group, most of those contracts were not cancelled at the beginning. But 3 months later, we decided to review some of those contracts so that we can realign what we need and what we actually didn't require. So to some extent, we were able to obtain some savings from manpower resources, but the contracts are still on. The payment, we didn't change the payment terms because we didn't have a problem around liquidity. So we were paying normal. If the contract says advance payment, we were paying advance payment. And if the contract says doesn't require advance payment, we were making normal payments. So we didn't have a challenge in terms of liquidity, but we're just trying to look at the necessity of some of these contracts. Is it essential or is it non-essential? And then we will embark into discussions with some of the providers or some of the contractors so that we can rationalize the requirements. So we were able to obtain some savings with manpower, but in terms of payment, we were continuing with normal payment patterns. So thank you very much, everybody, and thank you very much for the audience that you've provided, and we hope to see you later on. In case of anything, you can contact Katie and her team, and that can be shared with me in terms of professional knowledge sharing. We can always communicate. So thank you very much for the audience.